If there's no mechanism by which to quantify those into a dollar cent amount, you are back where you started, which I think is why we are so bad at killing projects. We're so bad at understanding the value we should be putting into certain innovation sprints, right? And just to bring some of that to life a little bit, in doing analysis then on the expected value of innovation projects, and I've run this now across thousands and thousands of different data points, it is astounding how many times we are seeing organizations and projects investing hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars, to generate $1 of expected value. I think the concepts of challenge-driven innovation that you and I know and love, right? I think it's one of the most practical tools that leaders have, because it starts with a real problem. It doesn't start with a process. It doesn't start with an idea, right? It's outcome first, and everything else in innovation tends to be input first, right? The other way around. And so I think, in the world we live in, we increasingly need to be outcome first minded.
There is a common trait shared by innovation practices across industries and sectors, and that is innovation is inherently uncertain because it is about the future. While grounded in the problems of the present and past, innovation is about changing and shaping the future. So that's why when we talk to innovation leaders across organizations, most frequently the numbers that they will be able to talk to with the greatest confidence are the numbers about what has already happened. Like, what was the cost of innovation projects? What was the number of ideas that they have received? What was the number of people that have been involved? What is the number of workshops or hackathons that they have run? And what is the number of projects that have entered the production cycle or got commercialized? However, when asked by their own executives to put a number on the value that these projects have created, the room will get silent most of the time, because that conversation is about the future. It's about the future value. Unfortunately, it is that silence that becomes the reason why innovation projects get killed among the first ones when budgets tighten. It is also the reason why I wanted to talk to my guest today, because the question that keeps circling back in my line of work is the question that I want to ask him. And that is, what does it take to activate innovators, generate innovation from within and from outside as well, and then over time build innovation capabilities and culture that make it last, but do so in a way that creates value that the business can see, measure, and trust. My guest today has spent the last 15 years helping organizations across industries and sectors to capture the ideas from their own people and from the problem solvers from around the world. And in that time, he has watched the same patterns repeat: enthusiasm, investment, activity, and then the question that ends the cycle: what is the bottom line impact? So he got tired of watching good people lose that argument. So he built a system to answer it. And then he wrote about this system in a book that he called XV, the system to align innovation, strategy, and value creation. 4 components, 1 formula, and shared language that finally lets innovation and non-innovation leaders give a numerical value to innovation and turn its inherently uncertain value into something more tangible. And above all, create a common language between innovation, strategy, operations, and finance leaders. So no more getting lost in translation while everybody speaks the same language. My guest today is Simon Hill, the founder and the CEO of Wazoku, the innovation delivery partner behind Total Innovation Podcast and InnoCentive Marketplace. He is a 5-time acquirer, a Founders Pledge member, and the Guardian's SME Business Leader of the Year. I'm your host, Iliriana, an innovation strategist at heart. This is Activate Innovation Lounge podcast dedicated to all the leaders with or without innovation in title who want to activate innovators, innovation, and innovation culture. If this sounds like you, hit subscribe or follow wherever you're listening, and let's welcome Simon Hill. Simon, we've known each other for a while, but for somebody who hasn't met you yet, who is Simon Hill?
Yeah, I I think about this question quite a lot because I'm quite a polymath in terms of the things that I do. But I think the best synthesis of this is that I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an innovator, and I'm a deep thinker who spent most of my career watching organizations, I think, waste their most valuable resource, which is not capital, is not technology, but it's the human ingenuity that sits just beyond the line of sight. And that's the blessing and the curse that bothers me every single day. But it sits behind this bigger mission, which is from a company perspective. So I said I'm a founder. I run this business called Wazoku. And the mission that we have at Wazoku is very much a personal mission as well, which is to change the world one idea at a time. And everything that I do really flows from that single mission, right? Whether it's running a company, helping others to build those companies through investing and advising, whether it's writing and researching for a variety of different places that I write and research for, and everything in between. It's all done with that sort of core central sort of driving force, if you will, to try and help drive some new value and just change the world one idea at a time.
Where did this all come from?
I don't know, some horrible voice in the back of my head. If you look from a background perspective, I have been in early stage business and growth business for quite a long time. But I'm really a 0 to 1 person, right? We both know John Windsor. He's the guy who really taught me about 0 to 1 thinking and 0 to 1 language. And what I mean by that is I like to get things I like ideas. I like the idea of ideas, and I'm very driven by the fact that the world doesn't necessarily need more ideas, but it needs better ways of connecting the need on one side with the solution on the other. And I said earlier that organizations are wasting this valuable resource, right? I believe innately in the problem-solving power of human beings, right? With lots and lots of, no matter who you are, not just the sort of published, celebrated authors, researchers, business leaders, but every single person. Partly because I've got this strong belief that the solution to most of the world's problems already exists somewhere else. We just can't connect them. We can't connect the need to the solution effectively enough, right? And where does that come from? Deep inside somewhere, I guess, is where it comes from.
I'm glad to hear that, because that gives us grounds for a lot of exploration in the course of this conversation. But what I want to take you back is that ideas are the origin of any innovation. And when you launched Wazoku back in 2011, what did you believe about innovation and ideation maybe then that you don't believe about innovation anymore today? What has changed since 2011?
Yeah, I mean, we live in a world where quite a lot has changed, I guess, right? I would say that ideas are the starting point to a degree, but really needs are the starting point. And, ideas are the little acorn that get you to an outcome. And I think let's explore this on two levels. So what's changed for me personally is I think I'm probably increasingly optimistic, but also increasingly frustrated with the fact that not enough has changed. And that whilst there is a huge amount of progress that has been born through the innovation work of people, in many ways, innovation still stuck where it was, right? If you look at the sort of the stats that sit around innovation success rates, really moved anywhere, right? I think that we've lived in an era of 20 odd years with a huge amount of great promise of technological advancement that perhaps has underdelivered in many ways as well, right? I think we've probably been setting the foundations for this next level, but equally, maybe we've always been saying that as well, right? And so on a personal level, I think that I've evolved my thinking quite a lot. I've also moved quite substantively beyond the world of just ideas, right? I think that you've got to consider innovation as a system. And, I strongly struggle with the idea that innovation is a job, as in a function in a business, rather than just, a mindset and a capability across people within organizations. I strongly struggle with the pure concepts of just ideas themselves, without the sort of, the embedded system to help get them to value. And we'll talk a lot about value in all of this space. But on the flip side, I think the world has become, flip side on the business side, I think that it's become an increasingly complex place. But also we are now in an era, as we were talking about before coming on air today, of significant opportunity, because with the AI capabilities that are now in the marketplace, it affords people that beforehand maybe struggled to be builders. And in a world where we need solutions, the ability to enable more and more people to build, I think is is a huge opportunity, right? Which does the thing that I've always said, which is it brings innovation into the hands of more and more and more people than ever before, right? Not just a person, not just a small team, not just a specialist innovation leader, but quite frankly, anybody that's got the want and the will, because the cost for feasibility in those sort of, the three interconnected circles of desirability, feasibility, viability, the cost of feasibility has come down to almost zero, right? We still have to figure out whether it's desirable, right, or not, and others, but the ability to build it is the cost is zero in many, many, many cases. And so that's a huge opportunity for the world to do something different.
So how has this new perspective of opportunities also influenced the way that you defined innovation when you started Wazoku versus the way you define innovation nowadays?
I think, I will talk about the book that I wrote probably later. And there's a whole chapter or a part of a chapter where in it, where the main character, steps back from this. She's a, fictional innovation leader and goes a bit into, sorry,
Is that Freya?
that's Freya, yeah, who is actually my daughter, but is a fictional human being because she's 9 years old and couldn't possibly be an innovation leader. Although she's highly innovative, but she spends her time on the internet and in her conversational AI is trying to figure out the myriad of different definitions of innovation, and there's so many out there. And if I'm honest with you, when I first started this business, I didn't bother too much with the definition of it because I saw myself as a technology provider that would work with companies who, if we think about it, they already had this figured out, right? In my mind, right? They already knew what they were doing. I was merely bringing them some technology to give them greater reach into more people in a more structured way with more insights. But as I said in the answer I gave earlier, it's not really just about ideas. And actually, I came to realize over a decade that most people haven't got it figured out, and that the inconsistencies of this are possibly the thing that's undermining them the most. And therefore, I went back to basics and wrote the book and did the things. And I think the definition is simple, which is it is something that creates new value, right? And I don't think you need to complicate it any more than that. If it's value that already exists, it's not new. And if it's not value, it's not innovation. Therefore, it's those two component parts, right? It's new, did not exist before, value. And that can come in a variety of different forms, but it's simple, right? And everything else just adds complexity to it. And I don't worry too much whether that's, new value in the products or markets that you serve today, or whether it's all the way out on, in sort of the future of products that don't yet exist into markets that don't yet exist and everything in between. It's just new value within any of those contexts, right? So I'm not worrying too much about the business of today, the business of tomorrow, the adjacent opportunities. They're all captured in that simple, singular sentence of, new value creation.
My line of work, what I've also come to see, like it is a new value. The way that I've seen the innovation is like it's a new value that gets like in very layman language, I use the term sell, a new value that sells. But this is not about the transaction. It's more about like it gets adopted by somebody that it creates that value for, because it can create value, but if it doesn't get accepted, adopted, used, deployed, leveraged, then it sort of like remains an invention. But what you also like now, you're talking like connecting everything that you said so far, when we have this new value that needs to be created, when we have problems, when we have people, and when we have ideas, there is one way that you and I think, are very passionate of how to bring these four together. And that's the innovation challenge. You launched Wazoku with the idea of innovation challenge. Then why innovation challenges? And then do you believe that innovation challenges are still a valuable tool to drive innovation within an organization or within its ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that, so this concept of challenge-driven innovation that you and I know and love, right? I think it's one of the most practical tools that leaders have because it starts with a real problem. It doesn't start with a process. It doesn't start with an idea, right? It's outcome first, and everything else in innovation tends to be input first, right? The other way around. And so I think, in the world we live in, we increasingly need to be outcome first minded. And, the pathway to how do I get to the most effective, most valuable outcome is fundamentally the question that all organizations need to be asking. And they should be revisiting every single assumption that they've got in this AI enabled world as well, because so many of the processes that we have, even in considering, writing a good challenge statement, are highly inefficient, right? Again, like the question is, can you remove the friction and make the transaction value of that close to zero, right? That's my underlying piece of this. And as I said in my introduction about who am I, and trying to drive human capital, the art of a well-framed problem, the art of a well-framed challenge that you're willing to throw out to a audience of people, whether they're your employees or more widely to anyone in the whole world or somewhere in between, is a superpower that can be, if I can reduce that transaction cost to close to zero, then any organization can have a global, innovation R&D team on tap for close to zero, right? Like, and that's how you unlock human ingenuity, how you unlock human problem solving. But in order to do it, you got to be pretty clear about what problem you're asking them to solve. Otherwise, you just create noise, right? And so, yeah, I think it's a superpower. It's not easy, but it's not that complicated either. And I think that human nature gets in the way of people using it more than they perhaps should, rather than, as in sort of risk compliance worries, not realities, rather than anything else, right? So yeah, simply put, I think it's the world's superpower that it needs to unlock much more readily.
I really agree. And I feel like even now there is a kind of like, I observe like a slight kind of like a resurrection of innovation challenges, because I see companies leveraging that competitive model to bring together innovators, meaning like AI innovators, problem solvers with AI as their tool. And I hope that we will see more of those. But what I also want to learn from you is you have helped organizations run innovation challenges both internally and externally. Where do these two differ?
Yeah. So I think they differ. I'm hesitant on this question, right? Because in some ways, I think they're not that different at all. So just to set some context, right? So I have two brands in the business. I have Wazoku, which is a technology platform that sells what we call a total innovation license, right? It's trying to help centralize as much of the innovation value chain, i.e. from need discovery all the way through to value creation in a single home for managing all of that, right? So how do I do that discovery? How do I do everything at scale? Back to that sort of democratization and path to zero, we sell that at a very, very low cost as well, right? So every company in the world can turn on that superpower for not a lot of money. Right? And when I say a lot of money, I'm talking about like $15,000. That gives you full access to every piece of functionality, and that from early market signaling, market research, market intelligence, through to internal campaigns, external campaigns, and everything. And I answer that question not to promote what I do, but because you asked me what's the difference between internal and external. And in our model, the difference is a choice, right? It's a choice. Do I want to ask everybody in the world, or do I just want to keep this private to the people that work for us? Now, there's some reasons why you'd want to keep that private to people that work for you. Mostly, I think it's context. So it's highly unlikely that people are far removed from your business are going to understand things that, maybe we'll call them incremental improvements or process and systems improvements, because they're very specific to you as a business. But I find that internally, whilst you can drive, sort of X type ideas or real sort of business model level ideas internally, the internal organization's a little bit less likely to do that. But it's quite good at moving the needle on smaller ideas that don't have to be small in terms of the value they create, but are perhaps a little bit more in that world of current or adjacent markets, current or adjacent products, rather than net new stuff from my innovation definition. However, in the external world, I would actively encourage all of my customers to allow their internal employees to also participate in their external challenges as if they are external people, which is very counterintuitive to lots of people who say, well, I pay them a salary. Why on earth would I want them to do that? And the answer is twofold, really. One is there's nothing to stop them leaving work at 5, 6 p.m. in an evening, logging on and participating in a challenge for somebody else. So why wouldn't you want to use that human capital for things that you can do? And secondly, that you'll learn something about those people, because quite often they won't be solving a problem in the area of their specific job. They'll be coming and getting involved in something that's outside of the domain that often the internal policies and the internal ways of working prohibit. It's quite hard sometimes for a person in finance to start getting involved in things in, I don't know, in marketing or something, right? Or whatever it might be. And so those abilities for you to go home, again, back in this world of everyone's a builder, everyone's a researcher, everyone's got this superpower at their fingertips now. And we've got all of these different skills from the job we do, but also the life we lead, that can enable us to add value in a variety of different ways. So I think it's a half answer to your question, because there are differences, but I try and break those differences down to be as little as possible between internal and external, and make it a mindset thing, really. And every time you do something internally, you should think to yourself, why am I not doing this externally? Because your competitor could be, as I've said, for not a lot of money, engaging millions of people on the same question, while you're limited to your few hundred or few thousand internal employees only. And the lens that they bring to it is always narrower than the lens that the external world brings to it as well.
That's true. And then the other thing is, like, when you use it in my teachings and my advocacy, challenge is an incentive mechanism because it does activate the innovators. So you do want to go at some point to activate those external innovators, or maybe engage those innovators that have already been activated by their own curiosity and desire to learn and test and tinker with something new. But you can do that with your own employees. And especially if the problem is something that does benefit from knowing the internal context of the problem. Because the more you know the problem, the easier you're going to be able to solve it and come up with a new solution. But like, if your problem is very external and it's like something that resides in the market, your team might not necessarily, or like your colleagues might not necessarily always have those external perspectives that you want to bring inside. So I do see this, because then this then also translates on the way that you design the challenge. Because if you run an internal innovation, you can quickly ask for prototypes and you can shape it into a one phase. The architecture of the challenge differs. But then if you go externally, you might want to be a bit more patient and have a longer term challenge and have different kind of engagement with the potential solvers there than that. But the principles of designing the challenge are going to remain the same. And then I guess that what differs, and this is also going to be a good segue to the next theme, is like, how does measuring the value and the success of internal challenges versus external challenges for innovation purpose differ in your line of work, or from your experience?
Yeah, and I think, whilst I agree with you in principle as well, I do constantly challenge. And look, I do this in my business as well. Like, there was a great myth. I think it's a myth, right? That there was such a big difference between internal and external. And my constant piece is there's not really, right? Like, there are some differences, but they're not necessarily as big or as scary, or as quite importantly, not really that real as they might seem. I think you could run the identical challenge internally and externally, and you'd be amazed at the results that you would get without incentives. Like, layer incentives
Actually,
in, and you
that
get
should be a
different things.
special offering.
Yeah,
That
but
should be a special offering for clients.
anyone, but my clients can do it right now, right? So they can come in, and on a click of a button, they can choose to push internal, to push to their known external, or to the whole world, right? It doesn't change. The only thing we do is we put a security check in to make sure that you don't do it by accident, because obviously you don't want to push proprietary information out into the world that you weren't intending to do. Like, that's the one area, really, right? But you can manage for that as long as you understand what the buttons you're pressing are doing, really. And that's the only piece. I think that's also true on value, right? We were talking earlier, and you said value can come in a myriad of different forms. I paraphrase what you said, and again, to a degree, I agree with that sentiment. But if you indulge me a little bit, and I, wear this sort of more capitalist hat, which isn't necessarily true for how I want to sort of us to all think about innovation, but we live in a world that is fundamentally capitalist. It is fundamentally led by the finance departments, whether they're at a government institutional level, whether they are, within our organizations, right? That is, and from an innovation perspective, That is how innovation is funded predominantly. I understand there are exceptions, but generally it's true. And whether you're a non-profit, for-profit, whether you're a government agency or not, the ability to therefore make sure that the value you are seeking to create can tie back to a financial number that can sit on a P&L in some way, shape, or form. Whilst it may feel uncomfortable in areas of impact and other areas, doesn't remove the fact that it costs something to create it, and that the definition of value in a capitalist world is predominantly perceived as a dollar and cents number, as a pound and pence number, whatever currency you might be dealing in, right? Mm-hmm. And everything we do can be attributed back to a value, right? In dollar cents terms as well. Not always easily, not always comfortably, not always as accurately as, a month-end set of financial accounts might be, but that doesn't stop us doing it. And the way that we've thought about value measurements, and I'm sort of skipping around your answer because my short answer is I don't think it matters between internal and external when you view it through this lens. The lens that matters is how efficiently am I creating new value in a specifically relevant area of strategic value for my organization, for my institution, or whatever it might be, right? And that value should be able to be quantified back as a predicted, expected value into the future, right? And in this sort of ties into the book that I wrote, right? This book called Expected Value. And it solves the problem imperfectly, because there is no perfect solution, of creating a forward-looking metric that can value an idea from the first minute it exists all the way through to the point where it either becomes no value because it's been killed, at which point in time it could become an asset on your balance sheet, or realized value, right? In terms of actual value appearing now in some part of your P&L, basically, as you go forward. And there are no forward-looking metrics in innovation land outside of this that do it. They purport to have leading indicators like return on investment or net present value or something else, but none of them are leading indicators. They're all lagging indicators, meaning that you've got to have deployed a whole bunch of risk and got to the point of some level of realized value before they start to appear anywhere. Otherwise, they're highly imperfect financial models that are not looking at anything that's subjective. And all of the work we do in innovation land is qualitative and subjective. And so if there's no mechanism by which to quantify those into a dollar cent amount, you are back where you started, which I think is why we are so bad at killing projects. We're so bad at understanding the value we should be putting into certain innovation sprints, right? And others. And just to bring some of that to life a little bit, in doing analysis then on the expected value of innovation projects, and I've run this now across thousands and thousands of different data points, it is astounding how many times we are seeing organizations and projects investing hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars, to generate $1 of expected value, i.e. there was no chance in planet Earth of this innovation ever being a profitable endeavor for this business, mostly because we're investing too much before our confidence levels are high enough. We don't know there's a willingness to pay. We've got no evidence that this is a viable idea in the marketplace. We've massively overestimated what the value of this thing might be into the marketplace. Again, there's no standardization of those things. Look at any startup pitch deck and they'll promise you the next unicorn for, no investment of one investment round, and then, and everyone's a billionaire. But in reality, very few make it through, right? And so without making that too cliche, there are so many bits. Everything is so urgent that we should do it today. But in reality, many ideas should be done much slower than they are done. And we should intentionally decelerate our innovation drives quite often to get to greater levels of proof before we start sinking more OPEX, CAPEX, risk capital into the things that we're doing. But more fundamentally than that is, not only is this a good idea that I have confidence in that I should do now, is it a good idea that I have confidence in that I should do now, and that we as a business have a strategic reason to be good at, that fits with our strategy. And the disconnect between innovation teams, product teams, R&D teams, and corporate strategy teams is alarmingly scary, right? And so that piece of the puzzle, and being able to quantify, is there and absolutely quantify at a portfolio level, is there a strategic resonance and relevance to this idea, this concept, this innovation that we wish to do, is then allows you to compare on a idea by idea, project by project, innovation by innovation basis, A, the value that you're expecting to get from this based off of what you know today, and B, the efficiency of that value creation, i.e., what you have to spend to get there, and compare those things side by side. You can't do that right now. And no wonder if we're sailing so blind with two arms tied behind our back and a blindfold over our head, that in, 2 decades of pushing this stuff now, before the quantification of it came to fore, that we were just sailing blind. No wonder the metrics haven't really moved. We've invested billions and not really generated anywhere near the value that innovation should have done.
So your response to this is that expected value formula with 4 core elements. Can you unpack what, like, all these 4 elements as one?
Yeah, so I just sort of touched on them a little bit in my previous answer. I know you asked me a question and then I went off on this long piece, but they're sort of connected, right? In terms of,
Yeah.
should it be internal, should it be external? Do you measure them differently? My answer is no. And my answer is also no of, do you measure differently between an innovation that's looking at existing products in existing markets versus one for the future. Now, the way you assess those things might be different, but the expected value is the expected value, right? The cost per $1 of expected value is the cost per $1 of expected value. And so ultimately, when you boil it down to a number that finance can understand, and getting innovation and finance into the same room to talk a language that they both understand, i.e., the P&L and the balance sheet language, is the same, right? And so yes, of course, there are mechanisms that you would judge them differently. But if I just go through it again, just to re-emphasize, so expected value is a simple algorithm. It tries to remove all of the bias that might come into these things from a personal perspective, or from a leadership perspective, so that you can evaluate any given idea or project in the context of the whole portfolio. It seeks to address 4 things. So 1, what is your confidence in this idea at this point in time? The answer to that is somewhere between 0 and 100% confident. You can never be less than 0, never be more than 100%. Probably in our life, we can never even be 100% confident in anything. So we're normally somewhere between, 0 and 99% confident, or 1 and 99% confident.
Is there any good confidence rate that is like bare minimum before you proceed, or it depends on how it relates to other components of the expected value formula?
So it is a system, right? And as we get through it, like the other components do feed it, as does historical learning. I spoke earlier about failures potentially going to the balance sheet. Innovators often argue that failing forward, failing fast is a thing, but we have no mechanism for quantifying it. I created this idea of kill credits, which are XV points you can stick on your balance sheet that you can then quantify back. Because if I do another project and my confidence goes up by 20% because I learned in the previous project of X, that 20% will have an expected value that I can draw straight from the balance sheet, right? I can draw straight from my kill credits, allowing finance to track whether we are actually generating value from the learnings that we're doing, the experiments that we're running. So confidence is first. Are there thresholds? Absolutely, right? We have to standardize what the difference is between 10% confident, 20% confident. However, there's no minimum, right? I would argue if you're 1% confident, you've probably got some work to do before pitching an idea to anybody. But the idea that we are assessing how confident we are, and we're not doing that with the exuberant hyperbole and overconfidence that maybe a startup founder would have pitching for their seed round or their investment round. I'm super confident. Okay, but what evidence do you have? How do you really support not the I'm confident because I'm a confident human being and because I've got to be confident because I'm trying to raise money, but how do we standardize this to a level go, well, you have no evidence of willingness to pay. You've got no evidence of the market attractiveness of this specific idea. And therefore, there are many reasons, and someone may come and go, but I do have these things. I'm like, but you can't get to the level of 50, 60% confidence if you haven't done the foundational work of 10 or 20% confidence. And so in all of that, we're going to show you where in your work you need to do things to rapidly shift from low to high confidence, even if you've already done some of the other activities as well, right? And so all of that is kind of laid out and defined in the book, and now increasingly built into agentic capability as well. So you don't have to overthink it. The point is it standardizes it, and it removes I think it adds something actually that most people just don't add, which is you very rarely consider your confidence score, right? So when this is an algorithm, if your confidence is only 50% or 20%, no matter how big the value is going forward, if I'm going to multiply this through, it will only ever be 20 or 50% of the value, even right now. We've only just started the equation, right, in terms of getting there. So confidence looks first. We then look at the probable value, right? Not the big number, not what's the TAM, the total addressable market, or the serviceable addressable market, or anything else. Just what, based off of what we know today, what's the probable value of this? What number are you sticking down and can get behind and really reinforce based off of the confidence and the other things we'll talk about in a minute. And again, we have a tendency to overestimate these things in the way we present them normally because we feel like we have to. This is trying to sanitize it down to a much safer space, to try and get the number down to a realistic number based off of what we know right now. All of these are dynamic, right? All of these will be steering points for us in terms of what we get there. And it looks at the potential value or the probable value over a 3-year period, taking away any of the investment costs that we might need to put in at this point in time, right? Which means the value might be pretty low. And the idea is that we want to get these numbers to be realistic and low at this point in time. So we've now got confidence, probable value, time sensitivity. So how urgent is this specific idea? Where is in the algorithm? So it could be 0.5 up to 1.5. 1 is just business as usual, right? Like the normal cadence you would have as a business is no reason to go slower or faster. Almost all ideas, that would be an alarm bell for me if something was 1. Because it doesn't really exist as a concept, a bit like 100% doesn't exist as a confidence rating, right? There are real reasons to go slower sometimes. I would argue many people in the early AI arms race of like trying to figure out what the hell AI is for, deploying lots and lots and lots of risk capital, didn't really have any confidence of what they were doing, right? Doesn't mean they shouldn't have done anything, but if you look at the confidence and value piece, I think it would have scored particularly low. I've looked at several of these. We could have argued, look, put a little bit less in because your expected value is quite a lot low by slowing down the time sensitivity. Take our time, learn. Don't we experiment, but our risk capital for this is a lot lower. We're not going to miss these boats because the boats are not even defined and built yet, let alone, sailing away with competitive advantage gone. So time sensitivity, but there are some reasons why you have to go faster. You may face regulatory, compression if you do not. You may have a, opportunity loss if you don't move quicker. I just came off a call where that was my recommendation, was do it quickly or don't do it at all, because it's a now or never thing, really, and the competitive opportunity is now, and if you miss it, it's probably missed. Versus intentionally decelerating certain things. So that's the first 3 parts. As I said earlier, those first 3 parts are trying to answer the question of, is this a good idea now, basically, or is it a good idea later? And then lastly, we look at strategic fit, and that answers the question through, of is this a good idea for us as an organization? So do we have the right capabilities in an attractive market, et cetera, et cetera? And all of these are quite qualitative things in many ways. That we are seeking to quantify into a simple algorithm. Those all get multiplied by down. So they come up to a number that'll be somewhere between 0 and 1 or 0 and 100%, but 0 and 1 in the algorithm, times a value, giving you your dollar amount, times a time sensitivity of 0.5 to 1.5, times a strategic fit of anything from 0.6 to 1.2. We haven't got time in this podcast to go to how you get to 1.2 or 0.6 in strategic fit, but you can score it all. That at the end of the day will give you a number of where your expected value is at this point in time. You take that number of XV and you divide it by the amount of money you're prepared to invest in it, and it'll tell you what your XV per dollar invested is as well. That's your efficiency rating for your innovation at this point in time. It's okay for that to be less than 1, as in like I'm going to invest $1 to generate 20 cents or something, as long as you do it cognitively and consciously from an organizational perspective. Right? So quite quick and quite high level, and we haven't got all day, but that's trying to, and that allows you to compare any idea of any type, of any size in a standardized way. Both in terms of expected value and also in terms of expected value efficiency, the cost to generate one. And then you can have a weighted portfolio across different types of risk and different types of return and other things from a business perspective.
So Simon, the expected value is, and all these 4 core pillars of the expected value are critical to evaluate ideas that you have collected. Do you see a use case for the same framework to inform the design of the challenges that are going to invite ideas, be those internal or external? And
Yeah, so
then
I think
if you
so.
go slow, would you start with the confidence level, or would you rather start with the strategic fit of the problem?
What you're trying to assess is not every idea necessarily would have an expected value. Problem statement, as we said earlier, in sort of challenge-driven innovation, is the outcome-based frame, and so to a degree, that's that is the space that you're trying to sort of innovate and ideate within, and you're trying to define the soft corners of that, not necessarily the hard corners, but the soft corners of that, to be able to then ascertain within that whether you've got a solution that can generate value at the efficiency level that you want to generate it at from a business perspective. It's quite hard to explain that you wouldn't necessarily evaluate every idea on an XV basis. What you want to try and get them into is into a thematic that is, or a project or a program basis, where you're really assessing each of the combined ideas for the value that they might create. To make that tangible, you wouldn't XV a market research report that was driving something. You wouldn't XV, I don't know, the modular build of a small part of a much bigger innovation program. You'd XV the whole program as you go forward. You may XV small parts of it to figure out whether they're the most efficient part, but really that's actually about controlling the risk capital that you've got going in at each of the different component elements of what you're doing, right? So not everything on planet Earth needs XVing. Not every idea needs XVing. We need to make sure, because you just die in signal noise, right? Like it would be impossible to figure it out. So the challenge and the strategic priority tells you where you're trying to get to from a business perspective, right? We're trying to grow revenue by X. We're trying to expand our business model into new markets or new service areas. We're trying to improve customer satisfaction by X, Y, or Z in order to improve retention by X%. Whatever the sort of strategic goalposts that you've set out from an organization are, those are sort of the cornerstone steers, if you like, that we need to sort of XV back against and get the right package of innovations into. An idea isn't an innovation, let's put it that way, right? Maybe it's the simplest part of piecing this together. So I don't know if I fully answered your question, but I was trying to be clear on like when and how you would
you did answer, but then you also gave me a perspective, is that when you invite ideas to solve a strategic problem for your business, whether you're asking ideas internally or externally, you might still want to put your challenge through this framework just to see, first of all, are you trying to solve the right problem? Is that problem a good strategic fit to solve for the company now or organization or the ecosystem, or is something to do later as one? But on the other hand, you still have to have your own evaluation criteria to assess every idea that you collect, because you owe that that accountability, that filtering, you owe that to every ideator or activated innovator, as I love to call them. But then once you have the short list of the ideas or prototypes with the highest potential, then it's that strategic moment to put in and to take those through the expected value filtering. So then you identify which ones of these shortlisted ones are the best to be continued to invest in, and which ones are the ones to either put them on a bucket list for later on or just kill them because they are not helping you solve in a way that you need to create value, be it for the organization or for the customers or the market in any way possible.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. You want a portfolio at the sort of opportunity space level,
Exactly.
right? So we kind of strip that away from the challenge and make it more about the sort of strategic opportunity space.
Yeah. And then you mentioned the portfolio. There's something about portfolio that I want to ask you, because you define portfolios differently from the three horizons so far. But before we get to the portfolio, you mentioned briefly the AI. How do you see the AI tools helping leaders calculate their own expected value faster, earlier, and make the expected value utilization a must-have, a joyful exercise to conduct in every innovation project?
I think that innovation and AI are quite natural bedfellows, right? As we started to enter into this sort of AI agentic era, there were definitely two schools of thought that ran off in different directions, which is, you can never AI innovation, or you could AI all of innovation. I'm closer to the second of those than to the first of those, really, which is, I think that, there's lots and lots of the innovation world, which is subject to the shortcomings of humans making it less efficient and less powerful than it otherwise could be. But there is a really important human in the loop element to the work that we do as innovators in getting stuff done, right? So just put that out there. I think there's lots of the innovation role can be massively enhanced through AI. On the flip side, there's this huge signal noise challenge that's coming through the AI world at the moment, and so XV becomes really important in all of that. But also, so quite frankly, does understanding the human on the other side of it, right? So we're doing a lot of work to anecdotally, the number of solutions we get on the open challenges has probably increased by, I don't know, 50x or something. Like it's gone up significantly. And that's not over 20 years. That doesn't just happen because you've suddenly got this viral moment of like more people engaged. It's like, no, there's just more junk coming in from people that don't have, or what do we call it now? AI slop. People that don't really have the credentials, that are sitting talking to an AI with a challenge statement in front of them that's now convinced them that this is a really good response to this specific call, but they know nothing about what they're putting in, really, right? They have no idea whether that's, real or not real, valid or not valid, desirable, feasible, whatever it might be. And so there's a huge amount of trying to get under the skin of that, because first of all, there's a lot of IP consideration around all of that, but second, it was just a lot of time wasting can go into trying to figure it out. But AI can help massively with that, partly through credentialing of people, which is a complex thing to do because a lot of the basis of open innovation relies on anonymity. However, there's a difference between me knowing who you are, where you're from, what your name is, versus me figuring out whether you've got any real reason to be credibly putting forward the response that you've put forward, right? But you and I believe strongly, I think the statistics tell you that, 70+% of my solutions come from people that you wouldn't hire to do this job, as in that their resume doesn't say I'm the best person for this on paper. However, they solve a problem that the best person on paper was unable to solve quite often. And so, what does the piece of paper know? That extrapolation, that inference of competency with over 20 years of data and being able to map and structure what makes Iliriana good at this, even though on her CV she has no right to be good at this, is a totally different data set than I happen to have done a studying in this and I happen to have had a job in this area, because that's not really what makes you good at problem solving. That just happens to be where your life led you, right? In certain cases. Yes, in discrete specialists, yes, in very specific areas, that may well be true, but for most of the world, that's not how our skills are not mapped in that way, right? And we just don't have that data. But the reverse is also true, that there are many people that just, you don't have any real knowledge of it. I could do that with, I don't know, some deeply technical scientific issue around healthcare or something. I know nothing about it. I could probably come up with a very convincing answer with a night of hacking through AI, but I don't think I should be putting those solutions in, right? Because I'm not the right person to do that. There's someone that can actually qualify and verify them. So anyway, I think that XV and AI, and you can very much clearly see how you could use AI to massively enrich and augment XV, which we have done and continue to do as well. And secondly, it isn't an absolute score, right? Like, it's not like we run it. You have an idea now, I run XV through it for you, and then we're done. No, right? We've now identified all of the areas. As we will walk away from this call, anything could happen in the world. We live in a world right now where literally anything does happen every 10 seconds, depending on the whims of certain people. And so that could massively make your idea 100 times more attractive or 100 times less attractive. XV therefore shifts on a dime. Like, the ability for us to do that across a broad portfolio as busy humans is almost zero. The ability for a machine to come in and constantly be mining for market signals, for strategic shifts in the organization that can be lost, down to the sort of operator level at the business for months and months and months on end. Oh, we stopped doing that. We stopped investing in this area. We shifted over here. Like, oh yeah, it was on a town hall over here, or it was in some document that was circulated that nobody read. That means we just carry on investing in areas. The AI is really good. Like, the machine is really good at picking up those things, flagging that your XV just shifted significantly, therefore needs attention paying on it to make a human-led decision of should we continue, accelerate, decelerate, or kill this idea going forward, at a portfolio level or at an individual idea level as well.
You're highlighting a new problem, but then when you mentioned like that the submissions increased 50x, one thing that also came to my mind is that could the AI lower the barriers of engagement with the open innovation, considering that the language might have been the barrier for many solvers to engage, because it does require the ability to articulate your idea in a way that is resonating with the challenge organizers or the sponsors. But then it could be that it requires you to submit your submission, your idea in a language that you don't speak. But now with AI, that has become more feasible because you can write in any language and then the AI will translate it to you in a relatively okay shape, right? That is acceptable. And then the AI slot, which makes it then now we need really the AI tools more than ever to at least do that first filtering of what is in scope, what are the ideas that are really like targeting and solving the problem that we want to solve, and then add that layer of the competency of the solver, so then you don't end up with an idea and no ability to execute on that idea once the challenge has concluded, because it does then also affect that credibility of the challenge and problem solving. And then you mentioned earlier, we like all of these tools are really good sources for building the innovation portfolio, because as an organization, you don't always have just one innovation project. You want to have several different kind of projects that in the old framework or school of thinking, you would distribute those in the three horizons of investments of innovation: the incremental, adjacent, and the breakthrough. But you organize the portfolios into performance, resilience, and enablement. Why why this departure from horizons and into the outcome of the certain sub portfolios?
Yeah, so and I agree with your other point, by the way, on AI. I have this sort of dual tension in my thinking. On the one hand, I have this underlying desire and drive to democratize innovation, as I've said, that reduce it to open it up to as many people as possible and reduce the cost of doing it down to as close to zero as we possibly can. Right? On the flip side, you have therefore a credentialing challenge to make sure that there is a legitimate reason why this isn't just made up by AI, right? And those are two quite hard, and they're quite hard, naturally not natural bedfellows that work together, right? Open up to everybody, now equip them with these super powerful AIs that can make anybody seem like they know what they're talking about, but it doesn't. It's the same as in that not everybody can be a successful entrepreneur. They're not the same, because lots of people could be a successful inventor, but in order to invent something, you have to understand what you're inventing, and therefore credentialing does come back to the baseline of it, right? Like you can't. It's very unlikely that serendipity is going to just throw the answer to you to a problem that the smartest people in the world have worked on, and when you understand nothing about it, you don't have to understand everything about it, because that's also a weakness, but understanding nothing about it is a bigger weakness. You have to have some level of understanding of something to do with what you're doing. So anyway, just to clarify on those two points.
On that, but then what this influences, it does influence the design of the challenge itself, because if you are going to take the ideas and work on those on your own, then you might not necessarily worry what are the credentials of the solver. But if you want to help that solver turn that idea into a prototype, then you do want to make sure that they have the credentials, because you want to have credible people being able to take that idea into something that you can test whether this is really solving what you're trying to solve. And then if you want to see them like same as in some prize competitions of the federal agencies in the US, where you can provide them space in different labs to go in and test, then you really want to have a very serious eligibility criteria informing those from the very beginning of the challenge, all with the goal of making it easier for them and making it easier for you as a sponsor, as a challenge designer, so you don't end up with more submissions that you really need, or like the ones that are not aligned with what you're trying to achieve and to the outcomes that you want to generate with the challenge.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessary, just to be clear on that as well, and I will answer your horizons question as well, is I'm not necessarily, just to be absolutely clear, I'm not saying that, I've got a problem that is related to, I don't know, like the manufacturing of a food process. Therefore, I need to go find someone who knows about food manufacturing, right? That's not what I'm saying. Well, and we've got these great examples in open innovation land of where adjacency plays all the skill. I'm going to give a TED talk later this year on that sort of topic, right? Of experts versus adjacent skill sets. And there's that great example of the Pringles chip that they were looking to try and find a more effective way of removing the grease and the fats from the potato chips without breaking them so they could stack neatly in the tower. Having approached many of the world's leading food scientists on this topic, led to a violinist from the New York Philharmonic Orchestra proposing sound waves as a solution.
It was a bass player. It was a bass player, and that's what Steven Shapiro shared in his episode of Activity
Yeah.
Lounge.
So bass player, violinist. I think it was a violinist, but either way, a musician from the Philharmonic Orchestra
Exactly.
bringing that solution that Stephen took from the InnoCentive stories, basically of these things, right? That means that, but there's a reason back to this credentialing thing why that lady would have understood sound waves and why that idea would have occurred to her in the context of her specialism, but not necessarily to the people in the food specialist area, which means the credentialing still stacks up, right? So it's not this 1+1=2 credentialing game where I'm looking for a material scientist, I'm a material scientist, crack on. That's the old world of employment and skills. It's a more nuanced world, it's a more difficult world to get, but that's how the open talent world really comes to fly, is when you get adjacent skills coming into match for it. On your question on the horizons piece, it is the three horizons and other things, right? I have a fundamental issue with the three horizons model, particularly in the world that we live in. Is part one, right? I don't think that we live in a world where that works anymore, right? Things move very quickly in many cases, and therefore trying to model over three quite short horizons, I'm like, I don't know. How does that really play out from an organizational perspective? And if anyone can bring me some really good examples, I'm prepared to be wrong, but I just don't see it. I think there's real merit in thinking about 10 plus years from now and everything in between, but how's that really necessarily helpful from a business perspective? And I would far rather, in a world where, as I've said, the build costs are down to zero, the pace of transformation and change, both on the need side and the solution side, is so fast and so quick that you get more into outcomes focused ways of thinking about and measuring things. And then the other framework that I like, and I've mentioned it a few times sort of passively in this conversation, is this sort of 9-box innovation matrix that we use quite a lot, which is your existing products, your adjacent products, your yet to be invented products, your existing markets, your adjacent markets, your yet to be invented markets, and just map those out as 9 boxes. And you can sort of fit them into things like sort of incremental adjacent and radical type innovation frameworks as well. But it just gives you 9 discrete boxes to work in. The time horizon will vary massively depending on your ability, the CapEx investment, the readiness of the knowledge to be able to create these things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They come into XV. XV has a time horizon to it. It has a natural go faster, go slower, a natural strategic fit element all tied to it. So it's not that they're not present in the thinking, it's that as a standalone framework, I just don't think they work in the contemporary setting, right? Others may disagree. I know lots of people quite like them. I just don't find them very useful.
So then performance, resilience, and enablement. What are these three?
Yeah. So on one basis, you could say that it's about growing, about being more efficient or productive in the things that you're doing, or it's about being more resilient in the world that we live in as well, which isn't just about environmental stuff. It's about a whole variety of different reasons why more and more businesses are disappearing more quickly, or their share prices are collapsing more rapidly than ever before. Like SaaS business models would be ones that are seeming to be less resilient at this particular point in time for a variety of different reasons as well. So for me, they're just quite nice, neat type packagings of things that speak exactly to XV, right? Like I said, everything can be XV'd and you can kind of standardize it, but in reality, you want to try and bucket them into one of those 3 areas, right? Is it a performance related thing, as in it's going to help us be better at the operations of today in some way, shape, or form? Is it a productivity, a growth related thing? I like the word productivity over over growth or other reasons, because it's doing more with the same resources, not necessarily less resources. And then there's this clear business resilience thing, right? Am I able to weather and be compliant with all of the different bits and pieces of what the broader market is expecting of me, so that there's longevity of shareholder value and business existence, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not sure they're exact replacements of the 3 horizon thing. In many ways, I think the 9-box thing I spoke to sort of does that job. But they are certainly a way of understanding that whilst XV can be used unilaterally across all ideas, not all ideas are equal, and not all ideas fall into the same categorization, but you couldn't have 50 different categorizations either.
Simon, that is excellent. And I have so many follow-up questions to that one, but we're coming close to the hour, and I'll save those questions for another conversation, because the XV is definitely changing the conversation. In my case, innovation challenges particularly, and activating the internal innovators first of all, and then external. But I love concluding these conversations with one same question for all my guests. And that is, you mentioned the word frustration very early in this conversation. And you've been in the trenches of activating internal and external innovators for quite a long time so far. But what is one question that still puzzles you or frustrates you about innovation that you don't have an answer to yet, and would like to direct that question to the audience of the podcast?
So it's a slightly self-indulgent question, and I think it's probably a frustration that both you and I share, which is the tools to do innovation better are sitting right under the noses of every single business leader, CEO, down at greater scale, at greater efficiency. And the open models that we've spoken about extensively today are evidensibly data-backed and time and research-backed, proven to be better predictors, better deliverers, both from if I look at my productivity, efficiency, resilience thing, they tick all of those boxes. And yet it's a small fragment of the marketplace that's actually using those tools effectively. When the cost for deploying them is close to zero and the risk factor of not deploying them is as high as it's ever been, why are more businesses not looking to more open models to accelerate and de-risk the programs of change that they should be bringing, right? Previously, it might have been that it was too risky, or we didn't have the skills capable, or it was too expensive. As I've told you today, right? And that's kind of breaking news. I haven't really told anybody that price point. We brought the price almost down to zero, right? You can literally access this entire data stack for almost nothing. The excuse of cost has kind of gone out of the window now, but still people do not, right? For a whole variety of different reasons. But the opportunity, both from a business perspective and also from a planetary perspective, is one that we've got to keep asking that question, and people have got to come up with better answers than they've come up with to date, or just use the tools.
So this is a profound question, and I am curious to see what the audience has to share, because I agree, like the opportunity to open up, call it problem solving, call it innovation challenge, call it a competition, call it a hackathon, call it whatever you want. Just open up to listening to what other people have to say about how you might solve something that is important to you as an organization, but equally important to them, and then equally important to the customers or beneficiaries of the value that you are creating. Simon Hill, absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming to another episode of Activate Innovation Lounge.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
I invited Simon to the podcast today because I was genuinely curious to understand from him, what does it take to activate innovators, especially the ones in the house? What does it take to inspire them to generate innovative solutions and make sure that they do create a value that business leaders can see, measure, and trust? What I learned from Simon today makes me optimistic that with the lens of the expected value on, more leaders will be empowered and encouraged to dive into the innovation work. Filtering ideas for confidence, predicted value, time sensitivity, and strategic fit provides business leaders with a rigorous evaluation system that unpacks the potential of ideas to create realized value for the business. And as business leaders start considering this, I really hope that innovation challenges will become your first method of choice. As Simon highlighted, the most valuable innovation resources sit just beyond the line of sight for many leaders. and these are the people. Innovation challenges do allow the leaders to match problem and people via a carefully designed process and a motivating price. With the XP formula at hand, focusing the challenge design on outcome can become a more tangible and I really believe a joyful exercise. And both Simon and I do agree that with innovation challenges at hand, you can activate either internal or external innovators. Remember that internal innovators will bring the context that external ones will never have. However, the external innovators will bring the adjacency that the internal innovators will rarely have. And Simon encourages you to run maybe both types of challenges and see what you get in return. Now, while we all have answers to a lot of questions, there will always be questions that we don't have answers to, and so does Simon. In spite of being a leader in the open innovation space for over 15 years now, there is one thing that he is deeply puzzled about, and he wants to learn from you. So Simon is asking you, why are so few organizations using open innovation when the cost of deploying it has dropped to almost zero and the cost of not deploying it has never been higher? What do you think? What is your experience? Maybe what is your experience in your organization? What is holding your organization back from adopting this method? So share your insights via comments, DMs, or videos, whatever works for you. Just make sure you tag us so we can follow up. And if today's conversation sparked your curiosity to learn more about how you might run your innovation challenge, how you might launch your first one and activate innovators, then go to opensolvestudio.com. We empower leaders with or without innovation in their title to master innovation challenges and build programs where innovation becomes a practice, a power, and not just a theater. I'm your host, Iliriana, and this is Activate Innovation Lounge. Until next time, stay curious and keep activating.